Welcome everyone, Joe with ECRM here at our contract manufacturing session in Dallas, and with me is Emily Page, CPG Growth Strategist for Start to Sold, and she just gave a great presentation to the contract manufacturers and brand owners here at the session. I'm going to read you the title of it because it's a great title that she came up with. Design it, build it, ship it. How the right packaging and supply chain tactics drive brand growth. So she covered a lot in this presentation. What we're going to do here is we're going to pull some takeaways from her discussion. Now, I also have the full video of her presentation, which, I'm going to share that out with everybody as well. But I wanted to dig into certain parts of the presentation here. So Emily, thanks for joining us. That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
And, obviously you covered each of those sections, right? The designing, the structural packaging and building it, and then the whole supply chain component, and the way you weaved it together was great. But, you started off with the numbers, right? Why do the numbers matter?
Packaging is what gets you on the shelf, but supply chain is what helps you to stay there. And so when we are managing our supply chain, we need to keep the profitability that we gain through revenue when we sell our products. And so what I showed everybody, which was probably a little bit overwhelming, was our profit function, which means profit is generated by the price we charge, the quantity that we sell, multiplied together, that's our total revenue, minus our fixed costs, minus our variable cost times our quantity, which we should add that little formula up there. But the point is that there's certain things we can do to increase profit. And what we need to do is to try to reduce our marginal costs as much as possible. And then that looks like either reducing the actual physical costs that we pay, but there's other costs such as risk. The chance that something could go wrong, that we'd have to replace it. A lot of times when we're calculating our profit, we're looking backwards. But when we're doing supply chain management, we need to be looking forwards. What's the probability that this outcome could happen or that we could possibly have additional costs? And so supply chain management, fueling growth, is about managing our risk, increasing the probability that we actually take home the profit that we think we're going to when we take our product to market.
And this is something that you want to keep a lens on at every point in the supply chain.
Right? Yes. And so in terms of, there's fixed costs. If we could reduce those as much as possible, we of course increase our profitability. There's variable costs, which are the individual packaging costs that we're incurring. If we can reduce that, we increase our profitability. If we become more efficient at manufacturing or importing our products, we can increase our overall profitability. And so we need to do that as we scale and keep an eye on the things that could cost us something that we don't even predict or expect. And how can we do that?
Gotcha. And there's a lot of points. At the same way that you want to manage the profitability at all of those points, those are all the points where there's risk also of things coming apart.
It's so scary. Well, so one of the things we talked about is design. And so actually design is an area where we have some risk, Joe, which people don't expect. When you do a rebrand, we had some really good examples in the Tropicana rebrand that happened, I believe is in 2020, I can't remember the year, but anyway, Tropicana did a rebrand, a few years back, and they spent over $35 million, both in paying their branding agency, paying for fresh marketing materials to be made, replacing inventory. So imagine they have to get all new packaging out on the shelf and fill it with product. They have to plan the distribution of that to different stores. They have to sell it, resell it to everybody. So they spent over $35 million. That doesn't even equate for the amount of time and distraction for their whole entire brand team to be focused on this issue. People hated it. They rolled out the new packaging design, and people didn't buy it. And immediately they started losing sales. They lost, I think 20% of their sales immediately, and it continued to decline. Retailers hated the new look because it wasn't going off shelf in time for expiration dates. And so they actually had to pay retailers to destroy the product that they had just created because it needed to be disposed of and thrown away because it couldn't be sold. And so they lost so much money. This is an example of a mistake that we need to avoid, is in our design process, the branding and packaging artwork, we have some risks.
Well, and also forget about, in addition to the numbers cost, the dollars and cents cost, you have the reputational costs. And it's just, they took a ding to the reputation for making something that people equated as, this was dumb.
Completely. And so if you're trying to ask yourself, how do I apply this to myself? The first actionable item I would say is do not design or rebrand in a vacuum. Your team of executives are accidentally going to be yes men in the sense that you're all drinking the same Kool-Aid, you all believe in your brand, you use the same vocabulary.
Same Kool-Aid or
same orange juice.
Yeah.
And so if you are only asking other people who are already on your team for their feedback, you're not going to have real, honest truth from the true customers. A lot of times people hire design agencies in cities that are metropolis, like New York or LA. Those are the largest agencies are located there. Those people working in those agencies are not representative of the entire United States or even middle America, where maybe some majority of your sales are actually occurring. And so you get bad information. So if you're designing with your branding, I highly recommend that you seek out an agency that has respect for the customer and is really going to help you provide real information. I also recommend that you do designs not just on a whiteboard. Most people look at their packaging design on a white space, and then they hear a pitch from their branding agency for why they designed it that way that they did. And it's easy for you to be convinced. Where it really matters is, what does it look like on the store shelf? Print out some mock-ups. Put them actually physically in stores and see whether shoppers are walking by the product or actually distracted and interested in buying what you have. Before you roll out everything, spend tons of money on implementing it, turn the branding process into smaller steps that will help to keep you safe.
Yeah, and I like that idea of the mock-ups on the shelves. There's a brand that I spoke with recently that would actually put mock-ups on the shelves before they're pitching a buyer. And then what they would do is they would take pictures and they would Photoshop. If they couldn't get on, into the store, they would Photoshop their products into that shelf area where they should be.
Yep.
And then in their presentation, they would show it to the buyer so that the buyer it was easier for them to make their decision. It was easier for them to see what it would look like on the shelf.
That's a very smart strategy. So I own a packaging design company called Pearl Resourcing, and we do that exact same thing. We really focus on trying to make sure the product will stand out in a competitive space. I don't honestly care if you like the design if it doesn't sell. If you're a brand owner, the best advice that you could get would be how to actually speak to and motivate your customer to make a purchase. That isn't necessarily what aesthetically you think is the coolest new look. We want to focus on sales.
What's going to sell? I mean, the market will tell you if it's the right decision or not, more than anything else. And then outside of that, one close way you could do it is getting the buyer feedback. So there was a brand that made pet products, and they were from Brazil. They came to our pet session, and this was a brilliant idea on a part of this particular brand. They wanted to redesign their packaging for all of their products for the US market. So they weren't in the US, they were planning on it, but what they did is they came to an ECRM session with no intention to actually have a deal. They weren't looking for that. They were using the session as a big focus group, and they solicited input from the buyers themselves on what design elements would be right for those buyers' customers. So think about it, if they get 25 or 30 buyers giving their input based on the buyer's knowledge of their customers, that's very powerful. So he took that feedback, revamped his whole line for the American market, came back 2 years later, and then knocked it out of the park. So along the way in your design efforts, getting feedback from objective people like the buyers, as opposed to your own designers, your own executives, but have the buyers give you feedback, it's well worth the effort and resources you put into it.
It's a great way to help mitigate risk, because technically there's the shopper who has their own opinion, but the retail buyer has to want to buy it too. And they know their industry, they know the competition. So when they see your product, they're the best people to give you strategic advice for how to improve, how to stand out, to explain to you what would motivate them to buy. Like, hey, I want to see the organic symbol be larger. Wow, what a great opportunity. And I agree with you, ECRM is an awesome opportunity to have face-to-face time, to get 10 full minutes to at least.
Or 20, yeah.
Or 20 if you pay for that version, to actually speak face-to-face with the retailer and get their honest feedback. It's a great way to avoid risk.
And you could bring several different designs. You could bring, mock-ups, bring several different structural mock-ups. Maybe you have it in a box or a can or a stand-up pouch, and give the buyer some options on what would work best on their shelf. And then I think you brought up a good point during your presentation about, getting buyer feedback. You want the buyer feedback in the design process because individual buyers from different retailers may have different requirements. So I came across this week when I talked to a brand that made feminine hygiene products, and they had a meeting with a buyer, and the only objective the buyer had loved everything else about the packaging, but on one particular call out, that retailer said that they used the color yellow. It was just a little call out, a little box on the front of the packaging, and I forget which color it was originally, but the retailer said, for that call out, we want it in.
So they want it louder, they want it brighter,
Yes.
they want it more obvious.
Yeah, and that's the only change. But the thing is, if you just went and designed it based on what you like and then presented it, you're gonna have to adjust it again. So if you get some buyer feedback along the way, that helps. And just in general, outside objective feedback, right?
Oh yeah, it's the only way to launch.
Yeah. So now let's move to the build strategy, right? So we talked a little bit about design, but the build, the structural packaging, why is this important? We touched on it a little bit, but overall, why is structural packaging important?
I can't talk about it enough, and I don't want to geek out and bore anyone who doesn't find this as interesting as I do. But obviously, we know what packaging artwork looks like, but the actual material that the printed substrate is going to be on, and the shape of it, the intended use of it, the way that you're going to use it once you buy it, this completely can shift everything when it comes to how a person would want to buy a product.
Yeah.
And an awesome story that I share is one which is in the peanut butter category, Justin's Peanut Butter. Before Justin's Peanut Butter, all the peanut butter brands that are out there, Skippy, Jiffy, Peter Pan, I think was a peanut butter brand. The colors were primary colors, red, blue, green, and very solid yellow, very solid shapes, very square. They were all in the same plastic tub. If you wanted natural peanut butter, it would be in a glass jar, but it would be at the very, very bottom shelf and had a very homespun look to it. Justice pops on the scene. They make two big changes. Number one, they had a visual design change. So they had all bright white packaging with an image of a nut on the front with honey or some kind of interior ingredient showing what the product looked like, and a very natural, starkly different look. But number two, they made structural changes. So they created a little pouch that you could rip open that would squeeze out peanut butter. This was incredible because the people who use peanut butter are packing lunches, they're packing snacks for their workout. And so the biggest pain with peanut butter is that it sticks to everything. It's very difficult to scoop out. You gotta clean the spoon now. You gotta clean the little cup that you put it in. So for them just changing the structural design of how they allowed consumers to have peanut butter, they found buyers wanted it. Yeah. They put it on the shelf, and not only were they in the shelf in one spot, they were able to be put in new spaces. So they were added to the peanut butter section, but they were also added at checkout. They were added at the bakery section so people could put it on their bagels in the morning. They changed the world by adding a new structure to peanut butter.
I think that's brilliant in that it gives you so many more opportunities, right? At the front end, you said in Starbucks, it was an option, another option for Starbucks. If someone bought a bagel or something, they could add that to it, it's so incremental money. But again, you can put it in more places in the store, and people just got to think about that. Is your product peggable, right? Because if it is, well, it can be cross-merchandised with something else. If it's more of a front-end item, or if it has the capability to be. Who would have thought of peanut butter at the front end until they made that packaging?
Never. And so it's important to think about your structural changes. And when we talk about building, there is the actual manufacturing of that structure, so picking what it's going to look like, but it's also finding factories. So who is it that can manufacture that for you as well as pack it for you? And so when we're building our business, our supply chain, it has a lot to do with building those relationships with factories that can manufacture this new cool way of structuring your product.
Yeah, and then also, if you have a product that needs protection, right? Whether it's candy or chocolate or something, we would do little squares. Or I know I was talking to somebody at a recent beauty session where they had, I believe it was bath bombs, but you could break it up into like a 3-foot bar.
Yes, I know, High Peach Lane.
Yes, and then, but they would have a problem when it's shipping. it would be mishandled and it would break. And then you had the Jocko mug. So structural packaging could protect the products as well. So you have to keep that in mind if you have something that's breakable.
Completely. And it helps to protect you from risk, thinking through your structural packaging in that case.
Yeah, because there's less returns, because that's going to cost you money
Breakage.
and all that. And yeah, so you got to replace it. So you essentially just lost that money.
Right.
So now this is a kind of a good segue, right? Because you had the design strategy and the build strategy. So, and like you said, this is great to get your products on the shelf, but now moving them from the beginning, the raw ingredients, all the way to the end is all supply chain logistics. And there's a lot of risk management going on there. But if you do it well, there's a lot of efficiencies there. So talk a little bit about the supply chain from a risk management perspective.
We could talk about it for hours, and it's a really cool topic, at least to me. But the issue of shipping it, getting the product to customers, we have to worry about the things that could go wrong. And so there's multiple ways that we can address that to reduce our risk. But and the most obvious one is to have multiple suppliers. I coach brands through Start to Sold, and I over and over again see that people who are an emerging brand or a mid-sized brand, they never thought of sourcing a different packaging company, getting estimates and quotes from that factory as well as physical samples, which means one thing goes wrong in their packaging supply chain, everything has to go from scratch. You have to start the whole process of developing the product, bidding it out, figuring out the logistics and supply chain, building terms with that new factory so that they even know who you are, because all of your eggs are built into that one factory partner relationship. Whoa, you guys, you're at so much risk. The same is true even with suppliers. We recently had a cocoa shortage, and chocolatiers across the United States and the whole world were struggling to get a hold of cocoa. If you were buying cocoa from one supplier and that supplier ran out, what are you going to do? And so risk management, one of the most powerful things is to make sure that you have other suppliers that you can go talk to. And
then you had a great phrase that I wrote down. If the supplier's ingredient is an ingredient in your product, then their weakest link is yours, right? And that's a perfect example. If that's the one cocoa supplier, there's a shortage, they can't get it, you're screwed. So, and I think to your point of having multiple suppliers, that's one example of how you can adjust it. And then we all saw the tariff situation, and everyone who knew what they were doing moved all of their manufacturing out of the hard-hit areas before the tariffs happened. So there was a lot of people talking about, how this is gonna, cause a lot of trouble and stuff. Well, when I went to our session in April, I was ready to hear about all of these nightmare stories and stuff. And everybody was like, no, we're fine. We moved it from here to Brazil. We moved it from here to Turkey last year. So they were fine. They kept, now the ones who didn't do it are screwed. Yeah. But the thing is, maybe they, natural selection, they didn't deserve to stay in business if they weren't thinking that far ahead. Well, and that's the message that someone watching needs to hear, is that if you don't have those things, then you're not on the there's a curve of people who are sophisticated in their business and advanced and really deeply entrenched, and the newbies are the people who don't have that. So if you don't have that, you're on that side of the spectrum, you're at the highest level of risk. People who have built out their supply chain with complex relationships and thought through all the different risk points, those people are going to survive the ups and downs that happen in the market. So our advice to you is be one of those wise brands that has built relationships with multiple suppliers. And we talked about sourcing different factories in different countries. The other piece is you should build a deeper relationship with the suppliers you already have. Every brand owner desperately wants from their retailer to get projections for how their sales will be because they want to protect themselves. Well, think about your supplier. I've never met a brand that took what they heard from their projections from a retailer and went down the supply chain and talked to every single one. They might talk to their largest manufacturer. Let's say they have a co-packer of one particular thing. They might share some projections of that single retailer to them. But it's very rare that emerging brands, mid-sized brands, share that information with their suppliers. And if you want to avoid risk, you have to talk to them about their risk points. You share what you're expecting, and you ask, hey,
What opportunities or risks do you currently see in your supply chain? Because their weakest link is your weakest link too.
Yeah, and look, none of this is new. We all know stuff happens. We had the pandemic, and that screwed things up. Then after the pandemic, we had the supply chain bottlenecks with the problems with the ports and the Suez Canal and all that. So, and then we had inflationary pressures. So there's always going to be something happening that's going to screw with the supply chain. And then the people who are smart, you know, what I did notice is like all of the supply chain issues after COVID, that people started getting smarter about moving stuff around and having backups. So then when you saw, you know, first during COVID, that caused problems, but then they learned from it and they got a little more resilient. And then you had the supply chain issues and bottlenecks that kind of, again, some people fell off and then the other ones got stronger. So that's the thing is, as you have the backups and have good relationships with the backups and share the same information with the backups. You mentioned that, right?
Absolutely. It really is about relationship, and it's about communication and planning in the future based on probable events. And so in general, you know, our big objective when we talk this entire video is really about helping you grow. And after you've launched your product, the next thing you need to focus on is protecting your margins and reducing risk, because the supply chain is what will facilitate your continued stable growth so that you last a lifetime.
Yeah, and don't forget, risk can come from success too. If you do really well, let's say you make a product and then somebody, a celebrity or influencer, posts about it and the demand is so huge, if you don't have the manufacturing capability lined up in advance, you're going to be out of stock of it, and that can ruin you. So have backups, but then also, I really like what you said about making sure you extend the plans down the supply chain so that they all know what you need, what molds you need, what specs, so that you can flip on a dime. It's like all of a sudden you got all this demand, flip the switch, boom, everybody's ready. Right up to the extra, the backups and the backups for the backups and all that.
Well, there's Pareto's principle, which says that 20% of one input will create 80% of one output. So you can apply this in positive and negative ways, but on the negative side, what it means if you're starting out, the true tip is that action item you should take is what 20% of, let's just say you have like 100 suppliers, 20% of those are gonna be the source of the highest risk, meaning that they are generating 80% of the resources for your product. So if you're small and you don't have a lot of time, focus on the most important key vendors. Focus there first, work your way down the list based on priority.
Yeah, well, that almost sounds like it's an answer to my last question for you. With these three things, design, build, and ship. If you're talking to an emerging brand, someone who's just getting started or recently launched, what would be your bottom, basic recommendations, right? Because this all together could be overwhelming. So, one key thing for design, one key recommendation for build, one key recommendation for ship. For the newbie out there that's just launching something.
Yeah, for the newbie on the design side, I say test it. It's one thing for your family and friends to say they find a new look attractive, for your spouse and partner to say things look great, your best friends. It's another thing for people to actually purchase. So the wisest thing to do is to create a brand and test it out. Do it in smaller levels, roll it out slower. Everyone I've ever worked with to help launch a product is so eager to get going, but the rushing is expensive because you don't notice the detail. That needs to probably change. So the first step is to start small and bring it to market in the smallest risk way. So small quantities actually make people buy it, not just tell you it looks cool. See if people actually purchase it based on what you've designed.
And independent retailers are a great way to start there. Small chains, go to your neighborhood retailers, and something that's privately owned where you're pretty much dealing with the owner. It's maybe 2, 3, 4 stores, 10, even up to 10 stores. You're dealing with a limited number of people, and they're more flexible, so they're more willing to work with you. You could go and approach them and say, look, we'd like to try a couple of different package designs and see what actually sells. So like Emily said, let the market determine whether it's good or not versus mom and dad or your brother and sister, or, they're gonna love it, but are they gonna buy it on their own? So that's great advice from the design perspective. What about build, from the build perspective?
Yeah, from the build perspective, I think, especially when you're in the emerging space and you're launching brand new products, take the time to look at the structure. There might be an enterprise brand that dominates on the shelf that's doing it one way. That small revision in structural packaging, finding a new way of delivering the same product, could be what it takes to get you wedged there onto the shelf and to grab attention from retail buyers so they take a risk and put you on shelf. So I recommend that you look at the structure and ask yourself those hard-hitting questions. Even though everyone's doing it this way, what could I do differently? And source new factory partners who could really help you to deliver it in that format.
Awesome. And shipping, right? On the ship it phase, what is your recommendation?
The ship it phase is like the one where you're taking it to market. And so I recommend whoever your suppliers are, that the largest, most important, where you're spending the most money, really, that's what you can look at. Who am I giving the most money to? Who's really finishing the product the most? Have strategic conversations with them to build a deeper partnership and make sure that they're on the same page with you and being transparent with you with regards to the risk assessment. And it is your job, to talk to your spouse about how are you feeling? How are you doing? It's also your job to ask those questions of your supplier and not take for granted the fact that they've been able to supply your needs up until now. And if for any reason there's risk, start looking for an additional backup.
Is it important to visit the factories in person?
Oh, yes, absolutely it is. And if you, for some reason, can't because you're maybe too small, you can always pay. There's inspection agencies, for example, in China, there's tons of them. You do need to be very specific about writing out what you're looking for, or they won't notice the
That's
details.
good for small brands to know. So if they can't afford to physically check all these places in person, which is a great thing to do if you can actually get there.
A must.
But if they can't, these places are...
That's the first, that's where you'd start. You hire an agency. Though, as a brand owner, you can't just delegate the responsibility of management. So you have to write out a spec sheet, and it's your job to think about the QA issues that could go wrong. So if you ever need help, you can hire me. I can help you with your QA related instructions, but you need to have what they should look like, as well as what product is not acceptable. So you need to have a tolerance level of this is not acceptable for us to be able to pay for that purchase order. It needs to look like this. When you do that, gosh, you really can cover your six with regards to the existing suppliers you already have relationships with.
Gotcha. And overall, I think you mentioned a couple of tools that are good to use for, not tools like a technology, but guidelines and I guess processes. Can you touch on some of those? Because I think for emerging brands, it's good for them to know this right off the bat of here's how I can kind of validate that I'm on the right track with my suppliers and manufacturers.
Yeah, techniques that I use both through my packaging company as well as when I'm coaching are, first of all, supplier agreements. So it could be manufacturer agreements. And in those types of agreements, we spec out the things that are important to us with regards to any transaction that we're willing to do with someone. So that could be a financial relationship. It could be a non-disclosure, a non-compete. Other things might be terms that you specify that you're expecting from your supplier. It could be audits or inspections. It could be the time when you're making payments, so it's still related to terms. So speccing out the kind of relationship that you want to have with your supplier in advance of working with them helps you to get on the same page and remember your own talking points and be able to remind them of the talking points that you've already had. It's not very fair to have a conversation with someone and then place a purchase order and expect that over years that you're working together, they're gonna remember what matters to you. So by documenting it and giving them a single sheet of paper that is what your company expects from any vendor that they choose to work with, you increase the chance that they're gonna be a successful relationship. And that should include something about, hey, your risk, hopefully opening communication and reiterating your desire for partnership so that when they go through risks, they're gonna disclose it to you so you can work together to solve them.
Gotcha. So you're making it easier for them to serve you better.
It's the only way to fly.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Emily. And so Emily has two different businesses. One of them is a consulting business for emerging brands, helping them to do what they need to successfully enter and succeed in retail. And then the other one is a packaging design company. You want to talk about each of those quickly?
So Start to Sold is where you can get consulting, but I also offer free webinars. I offer newsletters and blogs. There's tons of YouTube videos. So even a free training, I have an awesome training, and it's called How to Not Get Ghosted. when you're pitching to a retail buyer. So that means making sure that your pitch is good enough that you actually hear back from the retailer that you met with. And I highly recommend that to anyone who's pitching. So go to starttosold.net. And then if you are looking for rebranding and you want to up level, and maybe you want a premium New York agency, you want someone who actually knows what it is to launch products into stores, you should call Pearl Resourcing, pearlresourcing.net. We're here to help you guys up level in retail and online.
And Emily's been there, done that. She's created products, she's launched products, she's got them into retail, she's exited from product companies. So she's been to all of those things that you might be experiencing. She's been through it before. So she can give you firsthand, honest feedback on what you need to do. So thank you so much for the presentation and for joining us here.
Thank you, and I look forward to seeing the comments. If you have any questions, put them in the comments and we'll get back to you on it. Thanks.
Awesome.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.